Presentation was about the NDP and trying to pick out the salient features out of the NDP that really are relevant for now, because the NDP's got a number of goals. There's 7 goals in total, but today I just needed to focus on the ones that are practically relevant now, that are top of mind, which is inclusivity, dealing with inequality, addressing so both economic and social inequality, and also the issue of fighting corruption. So those are the 4 that I felt that they are relevant now, they are very specific now, as opposed to dealing with because the National Development Plan is a very big document. And then, you can't use a conference like this to try and take people through such a big document. If you go through the presentation, you see that it's based on answering specific questions, as opposed to having a content, because it's very easy when you do presentation that you have a content list, like you're writing a book. So there were 4 specific questions that we're trying to answer. One is, where is South Africa now in 2016? Then 2 is, what are those opportunities for development that the private sector have delivered? Third question is to say, what are the things that we need to keep an eye on? Fourthly is, what is our blind side? What are those things that will trip us up if we don't deal with it? So, and it was that very specific why is dealt with as a question. Because if you present it as questions, it means you need to respond to them. That means you need to give practical response. So, obviously, with regard to the South Africa now, the 3 topical issues is you got the fees must fall, or let's call it social unrest. Whether it's the fees must fall, the insourcing, but there's a social unrest. Society is very restless. The second issue is around how is government relating to its people. Do we really trust our government that it can deliver? I know in one of the pictures that I used says, although people say I want government to deliver, but at the same time they're saying government never live up to its promises. So you got that dichotomy. So that's what you do. And we go through corruption. I mean, it's one of the top of mind issues that we have to do. There's a tendency to malign corruption towards only government. And I don't want to do this corrupt and corruptee nonsense, sorry. But the issue is, there's lots of things that the private sector does that are not legal. That's why in the presentation I use the word illegal activities as opposed to fraud, corruption, because we get to get caught up in themes as opposed to issues. So that for me it's much more practical. Mm-hmm. In terms of answering the second question around what opportunities in terms of development, I use the industry that I come from, which is the property sector. Because the property sector is one of those sectors in which they're able to capture value. In simple terms, is that as a property investor, you identify an opportunity, whether to build a shopping center or to build an office. But what that opportunity does, it translates in you making money. That means you as a business, and obviously the government earns revenue out of tax revenue and other services. But once the building is up, so once the activity of construction comes, it's during construction, you create employment, you create opportunities, you also create other entrepreneurs, you use professionals, you use oil. Once the building is up, you need services. Somebody has to clean the building, somebody has to wash the windows. So the thing about the property sector is such that it has a lifetime impact on society. So that's why we're saying it's able to capture value, and it capture value much more appropriately. And then it's only in the private sector in which you can do that. There are very few governments in the world which has been able to use their assets, property assets, in such a manner that they can unlock that value in the same way that the private sector does. As I said, Sandton would have been a felt if it was not a private sector. Waterfall would still be a felt. Look, you'll notice deliberately today, I have not dealt with issue of efficiency of distribution. I said the private sector can capture value and redistribute. I didn't deal with the issue of efficiency of that distribution. Now, the efficiency, what do we mean by efficiency of distribution? We're talking about equality, right? To say those opportunities that are created, that we say are created, who are they created for, how are they created, and who are the beneficiaries? The only, I think, last thing that I left the audience with is to say that unless we address those efficiency issues, which is the question at the end, what is going to trip us up? Economic inequality is going to trip us up. Because if in those developments, in those offices, black people or the beneficiaries, and black people in general, as defined in the BE Act, the beneficiaries of transformation are always at the bottom of the ladder. At some point, somebody's going to rise up. Unless we deal with it now. Unless the ownership of those assets, in some way we find a way in which we can share that ownership equitably, or we can create access, unless we do that, social inequality, economic inequality, public unrest, and racism will trip us up. If you don't deal with transformation, those four things are never going to go away. It's short enough to invoke energy, and I think we try to make it engaging enough such that you can capture their attention. As I said, what you're trying to avoid is to become a lecture. It's rather spark a thinking such that beyond this conference, somebody can say, you know what, I need to go and look at this. I used the example in the presentation around why do billboards built on a Sunday. It's something that most of us notice, and members of the audience, actually, most of them are noting that there's something they notice, that on Sundays, but because they have not thought through what that logic is, we use this presentation for that. You educate them and says, in actual fact, that activity that might not have been that visible to you, in the economy or in the society, that's the impact it has. It might not be legal. Well, that's why those people are doing it on a Sunday. And the people that are involved in that activity, some of them might be sitting amongst us. And the issues that we're battling with, such as corruption, whatever, they might be involved in that one activity. So if you present a topic in that way, I think for me it's much more palatable, because tomorrow when somebody drives on the freeway and they see people building a billboard, already that presentation comes to mind to say, what was that idea that was talked about in the presentation, as opposed to us write a thesis on a screen and then do all sorts of things, because half the time, 10 minutes after they left the building, they probably don't remember the 2 lines that was in your presentation. Look, and I think that was also part of the presentation, to say one of the things that both as industry and also and it has to do with our history and the country, we are caught at a precipice, right? We want to share as much as we can, but we don't like sharing as much as we want. Now, it sounds confusing, but the simple thing is, we know that for us to be able to reach as many people as possible, you must share as loosely as you can. Whereas at the same time, our history, we come from a history where sharing information might get you into trouble. So people are still living that history. The only hope that I have is that with social media and tweets and Instagram and all of those things, is that we don't use our history to deny ourselves the future, because that's where the future is going. And like the example in Uganda, where they're using Facebook as part of their AIDS program. It's how do we use social media as part of these programs, so that it's not exclusively to the guys that were able to afford to arrive in Sandton. There's somebody who's sitting in the Eastern Cape, in the Free State, in KZN, in Limpopo, who might not, for whatever reason, have not been able to make it here. They must be able to have access to that material without them physically being here. Social media is one of the easiest ways in which you can make it available. There's new ways, websites and stuff like that. And I think for me, every conference, at the end of the conference, there must be some level. You might not give them everything, because obviously you need them to have paid, but there must be some level in which you share the outcomes of the conference.